All right, why don't we kick it off? I'll be very brief. Again, Jim Richardson. I'm the events chair of the Harvard Club of Minnesota. Welcome to this third in the CEO series. It, it's a well signed up series. We've got a great speaker today. Dean will tell you more about. I'll just mention a couple things. After this event, we have an event coming up on May 5th. Harvard Law professor Michael Klarman on the degradation of American democracy and the court. He's spoken to other Harvard clubs, and this has been wildly popular, so it should be a thought-provoking event. After that, we'll probably slow down a little bit in our events as we approach summer, but we'll have a few things coming that I'll let you know about as things get closer. The other thing I'll mention before starting up Bino is that it is approaching the end of our membership year, and so it's time for people to renew if they wish for the next year. Anybody who renews or joins the club from now on that membership will be good through the end of June of 2022. And you'll be hearing soon about a little incentive to encourage you to join if you're not currently a member. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I'll hand over to Dino, who is our B School chapter chair. Take it away, Dino.
Thank you, Jim. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So whatever you do, do with integrity. Wherever you go, go as a leader. Whomever you serve, serve with caring. Whenever you dream, dream with your all, and never, ever give up. This is the Carlson Credo, a set of values that has enabled the family company to successfully grow for over 80 years, creating one of the largest private companies in the world that operates in nearly 150 countries around the globe. It all started in 1938 when Kurt Carlson took an idea for a loyalty program and a $55 loan and founded the Gold Bond Stamp Company in Minneapolis. Since then, Carlson has operated and grew some of the most famous brands in the world, including Radisson Hotels and TGI Fridays restaurants. However, with the accelerating pace of change around the world, the business needed to change as well. And under Diana Nelson's leadership, a third-generation family leader and our former CEO series guest of honor, the company divested its TGIF and hotels businesses and doubled down on Carlson Wagonly Travel, which is a premier business and travel management company. Additionally, in 2018, the company has launched Carlson Private Capital Partners, or CPC for short, a private investment firm that invests family capital in businesses best served by an investment partner focused on a long-term value creation. We're very fortunate and grateful to have Andy Cantwell here today, the CEO and managing partner of CPC, who was entrusted by Diana and the Carlson family to build a rockstar team of investment professionals and lead the effort in helping the family partner with exceptional management teams with the goal to build great businesses together. Prior to leading CPC, Andy was a partner at Norwest Equity Partners, a local middle market private equity firm of $7 billion under management. And Andy has worked closely with founders, management teams, and served on numerous boards of private companies across a variety of industries, including industrial, distribution, consumer, building products, and business and tech-enabled services. One fun fact, and I hope he doesn't hold this against me, but when I first met Andy, he told me he likes to wake up very early in the morning, I think around 5:30 a.m., if I remember correctly, and just sit on his porch and think about life for about an hour, which I thought was awesome and something that is increasingly rare in today's world. So no wonder that he has clarity of mind to make multi-million-dollar bets for a living. All in all, Andy is a stellar individual who came long ways from his farming roots to now leading one of the most prestigious investment firms in the Midwest. Now, some of you already may know me. My name is Dino Belankov, and I'm the chair of our business school chapter, as Jim has said. But what you may not know is that I moved to this country in 2007 on a tennis scholarship with a completely broken English and not having a clue what to do with my life if tennis didn't work out. But by 2009, I enrolled into the Carlson School of Management, and it completely changed me. It opened the doors to a better life that I didn't even know how to dream about while growing up in Croatia. So because of that, the Carlson brand and everything associated with it truly has a special meaning and place in my heart. And this is why I'm incredibly excited and deeply honored to have the privilege to invite Andy to a virtual stage and have us all learn about his views on private equity investing, what makes CPC special, as well as pick up a few leadership lessons he learned along the way. Let's give a big virtual round of applause to this Wisconsin Finance undergrad and Kellogg MBA graduate. And if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box. Andy, welcome.
Thank you, Dino. Appreciate that introduction. Usually,
awesome.
If I'm introduced with Wisconsin and Kellogg in an audience of Minnesota and Harvard alums, usually something's being thrown at me. So I'm happy it's a virtual event versus a physical event.
Well, you're the rock star here today. So thank you again for joining us. Before we dive into the private equity and all the professional stuff, tell us a little bit about yourself, your story. You know, where did you grow up, and how did you get to where you are today?
Sure. I grew up in a small farm town outside of Madison, Wisconsin. Lived there till I was about 14 years old. I was the first one in my family to go to college. My dad was one of 10 in his family, but I just grew up with an older brother. As I mentioned, my father didn't go to college. My mother was a union factory worker. Had a great upbringing in a small farm town. Moved to La Crosse, Wisconsin when I was going to be a freshman in high school. And then as Dino mentioned, I matriculated to the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Spent 4 years there, and then I moved down to Chicago and spent the first half of my career in commercial and investment banking in Chicago. Got
it. And I mean, from farm town to investment banking, people would think not a really typical path. What got you interested into finance and pursuing this career path?
You know, it's a great question. I grew up, wanted to be a high school basketball coach. Would have been my dream job when I was a younger kid. And by looking at me, you probably wouldn't imagine that because I'm about 5'10" and I'm not very good at basketball, but I loved it. But I realized that at some stage I like numbers a lot too. And my dad actually took me down to the Robert W. Baird office in Madison back probably in the mid 80s. I was doing some business down there and just saw the ticker tape come off back when they used to just have the ticker tape instead of a computer screen. And I remember just being fascinated with the world of finance. So ultimately just found that was something I really enjoyed numbers, and ultimately, just got good fortune to start working in leverage finance early in my career back in 1995. So I guess I've been doing this now almost 26 years. But had a great opportunity to be at the really early days of the private equity industry and the leverage buyout industry. So I learned a lot, and we'll talk about it. The world's changed a lot from the time that I started back in the mid-90s. But it's been a great path to get here.
And one last question on a personal front, but what was it like to move from, farm town, Wisconsin to, I guess, then Madison, a little bit bigger city town, and then to Chicago, to Minneapolis? Any culture shock from moving around?
No, I loved every minute of it. Every place has just got such uniqueness to it. Living in all those different cities at different periods of my life. But I'll always have deep roots to Wisconsin. But I do love the time in Minnesota. And as you mentioned, I love sitting on my porch. That's probably my favorite thing to do when the weather does warm up. So those 5:30 a.m. Wake up calls to think about the unfortunately are happening down more in my basement these days than I would like. But all great places to live and just great experiences.
Well, you get about 3 to 4 months of your porch weather here.
That's what I'm looking forward to.
So you mentioned you've been in private equity since kind of the beginning of the industry when it was getting formed. And, for the audience that doesn't have background in this field, how do you think about private equity and organize its many pieces in different buckets? What is private equity? What is a hedge fund? What is a VC? please tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Private equity, the industry really, I think in a lot of ways, started back in the 1980s. And traditionally, it was really financial engineering was kind of the main focus of private equity, even the time that I was involved in the industry in the mid 90s, where investors would find a really successful business that probably didn't have a lot of leverage on it, put leverage on the business and take a big dividend, and then hopefully grow the value of the company. The industry has evolved a lot since then. I would say private equity today is really, if you kind of look at the spectrum, a lot of ways of what founder, family business, private business can do if they want to get some liquidity. You really have 3 to 4 options. If you have scale and size, you can typically, you can think about taking a company public, but that's a very small few companies these days. You can sell to a strategic, you can sell to a competitor, or you can get liquidity selling to private equity or an institutional investor. And the industry, versus hedge funds, which are typically going to be involved more in publicly traded instruments, maybe doing some things in the private markets as well. Private equity provides that liquidity, and essentially the founding owners, or the people that may own that business today, bring in an institutional investment partner, oftentimes to help them grow. What we've started up for the Carlson family, and they've had a great idea to do this, as Dino mentioned, a handful of years ago, was really to come up with an alternative option to any one of those 3. And we look at family capital, which is basically families like Carlson's investing directly in privately held companies, is a really unique and different take on traditional private equity. And it allows for, that investment capital to be much more long-term, much more flexible, much more patient capital.
Makes sense. And you mentioned being fascinated by tickers, and then you go into the industry that, invest in smaller companies that don't have tickers on a public market exchange. So why this route versus a hedge fund route?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I love the idea of working with middle market companies, smaller businesses, where you feel like you're having more of a day-to-day impact in helping those businesses grow. The public markets, to me, on a personal level, are fascinating. I track the public markets, spend a lot of time thinking about the public markets, but the private markets, and really being able to be involved on a board level or a resource level, helping to execute the strategy, helping to design the strategy, oftentimes with some of our management teams, I find that to be very rewarding. And I love the people element of this business and building those relationships and helping the companies grow. And you can do that much more in the private markets than you can in the public markets.
Makes sense. So on that note, can you tell us a little bit more about what's happening in private equity industry here in the Midwest, and then maybe more focused on Minnesota, wherever you want to take it?
Yeah, sure. I think we're blessed with such a great basket of companies, both at the large scale and Fortune 500 companies, but in the middle market in particular. There's so many great businesses in Minnesota, great businesses in the upper Midwest, typically have family founder ownership to them, a lot of them. And I think that just really allows for great investment opportunities. We have always been very tied to this geography, both in our investing careers with my team here at CPC and the family, just really helping these businesses grow and thrive and supporting the communities. So we really look at the landscape here as just being a great place to do business, good people, good culture, really good alignment from that perspective. And the other thing we're really blessed with that I think is often overlooked in the Twin Cities is just a very robust financial advisory and investment banking community here. If you look at the landscape in the Twin Cities for the size of the cities that we live in and compare that across the US, with the exception of New York, maybe Chicago, maybe San Francisco for tech, there's a lot of really savvy and good investment banks, financial advisors that are either headquartered here or have satellite offices here of some scale. And I think that just really allows for Minneapolis and the upper Midwest in particular to just be a really vibrant deal community and investment community. So it's a great place. The traditional private equity landscape here, there's a handful of firms that have been around a long time. At the larger scale would be Norwest Equity Partners, when I was about 13 years of my career. Goldner Hawn, Shoreview are probably the next tier down as far as size of investment capital. And then there's some smaller players out there like Tonka Bay, who I really respect a lot as well. But it's a great investment community, great financial community.
And so, you mentioned investment banks and a lot of people in the finance industry here, and then there's also a lot of money in New York, San Francisco, Chicago looking for deals. It seems like there's more money and more PE firms, like new one opens every other Tuesday. So, somebody who didn't get a promotion at KKR just decides to leave and raise some money. So how do you compete, and how do you view this dynamic of more money chasing a limited number of high quality companies? And what will be your advice for management teams that are trying to take money from a financial sponsor, what to look for?
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it, one of the reasons I love working with the Carlson family and the partnership and the firm that we've started it together is, this is different than traditional private equity. So we look oftentimes at, we're not competing with that asset class in a lot of ways, because you're right, there's been a lot of capital raised, there's a lot of new firms that are out there, but family capital and our approach and our appeal, especially to family and founder-owned businesses, we look at it as it's just different. It's just a different alternative for them, which is really nice. And for your question on, what should management teams or founders be thinking about? I think the biggest things from my perspective are really, just alignment with who that firm is, who your partners may be, because it really does become a partnership of working together. So I would say doing a lot of due diligence and homework on not only the reputation of the firm, but the reputation of the individual people that you'll be working with. Because at some of these bigger firms, you can have different cultures within the firm as well. So I think really spending a lot of time on that, spending a lot of time doing reverse due diligence. People do due diligence on a company, but doing reverse due diligence on who your partners are, very important step. And I think the more preparation that a management team or a founder has around their business and making sure that business is prepared to go through a sale process at some stage, I think that's a real important element as you're navigating the journey to finding investment capital or a new partner.
Makes a lot of sense. So when you say you're different, aside from having that family capital and maybe you're not held to, to a particular investing period when you have to sell off, like, what else? Can you tell us a little bit about the history about Carlson Private Capital, how it came to be? You started in 2018, but I'm sure there were some conversations happening before that, deciding to enter this, and just what was the logic behind it? How did it evolve into what it is today? And how are you thinking about building that different player in the industry that companies want to partner with?
Yeah, so I think as you mentioned earlier, the family had made the decision to sell TGI Fridays and Radisson Hotel. They had this capital that came back and knew they wanted to build out a new portfolio of businesses and still have a really big impact, not only in the business community, but also in the just general communities in which we serve, which we have a great avenue for doing that through the Carlson Family Foundation. So this allowed the family to really have that continued connectivity, find some great businesses that we can help grow and support and put capital behind. And when I started to have some conversations with them during the process of getting to know them a little bit, I really thought this is really just a better alternative to what's out in the market. And they're really a scale of people that are doing direct investments in the upper Midwest. I think this is probably with both the capital and then the infrastructure that we built out with our people and our resources. It's really a unique platform, and that process of going through and doing that, making our first few investments, and then being able, in the case of a business we have up in Detroit Lakes called Lake Shirts, we've been able to make some investments into the community as well through the Carlson Family Foundation. It's really a unique model that I haven't seen anyone executing.
Yeah. No, I've been in the industry before, and I haven't seen similar things around here either. So, from what I can see from outside in, you guys are doing a good job so far. What are you looking for in the companies when you're evaluating investments?
Yeah, I would say predominantly they're going to be family or founder-owned companies. Our bar is definitely higher on companies that maybe already have private equity ownership or institutional ownership. It's usually going to be a business that's got family founder-owned dynamics, where they've said, hey, we know we want to get some liquidity, or we need some capital to do an acquisition, or they're just thinking about what their strategic options may be down the road. And we think there's really good alignment, with culture and values that you mentioned at the beginning through the Carlson Credo. Finding businesses that just have that great DNA, that are market leaders, that are going to care that the capital is coming in. It's going to be a little bit different. And it's a wide range of industries. So we've invested in industrial business, consumer business, a business that's providing equipment, service, technology to the infrastructure space. We have an e-commerce platform that we just invested in the last summer. So it's a wide range of industries, but there's usually an undertone of family or founder ownership, that dynamic that's at play, where they're looking for something that's a little bit different.
Got it. And is there some more kind of tangible and more let's call it ruthless criteria when you filter out companies in terms of, you got to be this size, you got to be doing this type of growth year over year, market position. What do you look for there?
Typically it's going to be north of $50 million in revenue. We look at operating income targets or EBITDA targets oftentimes. It's usually something that's north of $5 million in EBITDA. But that $50 million revenue range is usually a pretty good place to start. And as I mentioned, the industry focus for us, if you look at where we've invested historically back at our previous firms, we spend a fair bit of time around consumer, industrial, business and industrial services, distribution. I think over time, we'd like to do a little bit more in healthcare and financial services. But we've obviously, starting out with a smaller firm, we want to keep our focus pretty tight. And spending our time on the right opportunities where we think they're a good fit.
So what will be your response to, let's say, a CEO of a private equity firm that's just focused on industrials, and he says, we just know industrials, and then we only invest in this space and know it inside and out, and we can take our company to the next level. How do you compete on that kind of deal when you're a generalist? Yeah,
I don't think it's rocket science, frankly. The way I kind of look at it, I think oftentimes, firms that are all really specialized, it's as much about marketing as it is anything else. The beauty in our firm and our model, and I think the experience we all have, is we've got access to great resources across every industry. So we know people that could either be value-added board members or could have some interesting insights that could help drive the business forward, whatever that may be. We don't see a lot of downfall from staying broader and staying more of a generalist firm. And what it allows you to do too is be much more flexible on just finding great businesses and great investment opportunities. I probably had, 5 to 10 investments over my career where I would have never said this is an industry that I would have targeted investing in or developing a thesis before I made the investment. Carpet distribution being one of them, which turned out to be a great investment that I made at a previous firm. But you're not going to develop a very detailed thesis around carpet distribution, right? But you find a great company that comes your way, that's got dynamics that you like, that's growing, that's high margin. It just allows you to be much more opportunistic on finding things that you just think are going to be a really good fit.
Yeah. How much do management teams care about that specialization or being a generalist, or do they?
I don't find that they do. I think what management teams care about more than anything else is it's going to be the right partner that's going to support me the right way, allow me to run the business, to do my job,
Mhm.
and just support me through good times and bad. And that's typically our approach with our management teams. We execute what I call more of a pull strategy than a push strategy. We're typically having our management teams pull us into situations where maybe they want, some advice or resources or access to expertise. But we're typically not pushing that down on them. Our philosophy is our management teams have most every time forgotten more about their business than we're ever going to know. So we don't want to be operators, but we just want to be really good value-added partners. And we typically do that through, really being the back office or the engine room on add-on M&A activities, for example, helping to set strategy or whatever that may be. But, our approach too is to keep it pretty simple.
Yeah.
Before we make the investment, we usually look at 3 to 5 things that are really going to move the needle to have it be a great outcome for everybody. And we focus pretty hard on those 3 to 5 things that we really think are going to move the needle, and then put a lot of resources behind that. And it just allows the management team to, really free up, some capacity where we can take a heavy lift if it may be add-on M&A or, an operating initiative or whatever it may be, because we have such great access to resources and expertise that we've
Makes sense.
been over the years from there before.
So on that note, what are you doing to source your deals and find these great management teams? And, maybe on top of that, what are you doing differently to find these great management teams from other private equity firms that are chasing good deals?
Yeah, I think the traditional model, and we still see a lot of our deal flow through the traditional investment banking channel, right? So most folks, if they've got a high quality business, they'll want to hire an advisor to help them figure out what they should do from a liquidity perspective. So we're involved in situations where a banker, for example, may be involved with an advisor to help them find liquidity. As I mentioned earlier, we typically spend more of our time on situations if it's got family or founder ownership, because we see that if they've got an alternative of our model versus traditional private equity where they have to sell every 3 to 5 years, there's usually a bias to find somebody that can come in and be more flexible and much more long-term focused for the business. But the other thing that I think we do that's a little bit unique now is we've really built out, I would call them kind of centers of excellence, or just ecosystems or epicenters in the upper Midwest, where we've gotten to know a lot of people just through our trusted advisor network and being in the industry for a number of years, where we oftentimes get some phone calls where maybe they're calling one person, small handful of folks, if a business is looking for some liquidity that may be outside of the traditional investment banking channel.
Makes sense. So what keeps you up at night when you think about CPC going forward?
What keeps me up at night? It's a good question. It's a really good question. My light just turned off in my office too. I think for us, it's just what I think most at night about is there an unknown in our portfolio? Like a technology change or a regulatory change, or something that is just kind of the unforeseen. I spent a lot of time thinking about that stuff and trying to just make sure we're well positioned with our companies, thinking out 5 to 10 years. And that's the beauty in our model too, that you don't have to be thinking in 3 to 5 year increments and maybe making some short-term decisions that are not the best long-term interest of the company, especially around things like technology or capital investment, whatever it may be. I think about that. I think about just our people a lot, and not only the people that are working at Carlson Private Capital, but our management teams, and just doing anything I can do as a leader to make sure that they're growing professionally, that the companies are taken well care of, excuse me. Those are the things that probably keep me up at night more than anything else. The markets are what they are. I've lived through enough cycles. I've lived through times where, like today, valuations are extraordinarily high. I've also gone through times where it's 01, 02 or 08, 09, where you're managing through recession. So I just learned if you just do the right thing and you're positioned or prepared for tough times ahead, but you're showing that support at every stage along the way, good things usually work out.
Got it. And thinking about, getting involved with these management teams and portfolio companies, can you give us an example of how you get involved with the business, at what level? What's the typical thing you would do, aside from just writing a check?
Yeah. So a good example would be an investment we made December 2019, a company called Legacies up in Minnesota. It's a phenomenal company, great management team, two founders, started the business from their basement in 1984, grew it into over $100 million business, and we invested in the company. They were looking for somebody to provide some liquidity, but that was going to be a long-term holder, be an investor, not only in the company, but in the community, do all the right things, super philanthropic business, always voted the best place to work up in Becker County, just a great company. And, our relationship with them for the investment and during COVID and through COVID, it just took on a lot of different forms. So we made the investment, and we set up a really great board there. We brought in two independent directors, Scott Anderson, who used to run Patterson Dental Supply, executive from Granger, that brought really good perspective that was not from the traditional, I would say, apparel industry, but gave them really new and fresh perspectives from some different industries. And then obviously, as a lot of businesses experienced back in April and May of last year, especially in Lakeshire's case, because 70% of the businesses in the resort channel, they had a massive impact from COVID. So that involvement took the form of, just really supporting the management teams, helping make sure we could manage through, any short-term liquidity challenges that we had, just doing the right things for the business. And then we all came together probably May of last year and said, hey, this is a great time for us to go out and execute some add-on M&A. There's going to be some targets and opportunities for us that otherwise wouldn't be available. We made 3 acquisitions in the last, I think, 4 or 5 months of 2020, all situations where we brought on the management teams from those companies. And on the other side of COVID, I think we feel more confident about that company than we ever have. It's doing really, really well, and the outlook for the balance of this year is really strong. So it's doing that, supporting the management teams, building out a great board, working with the capital markets, that's the banks or otherwise, executing M&A. We're helping with some strategic initiatives just on some operational efficiencies. So it kind of takes a whole host of things, but all along the way, we've locked arms with our management teams and management insurance and formed just a phenomenal relationship out of the gates that we think is going to last for years to come.
Well, I can see you smiling as you're talking about it. It feels, the genuine excitement comes through. So when you think about CPC over the next 5-10 years, what gets you excited? What are the opportunities you see on the horizon where you can take this thing?
Yeah, I just see a real shift going on in the private capital markets, and I like to think we're kind of on the cutting edge of that. Just with the shift to family capital, I think there's more awareness in the market. I think historically, family offices were typically branded as being slow or a small team that couldn't execute a transaction or whatever it may be. And I give the Carlson family so much credit, because when they decided to do this, they decided to bring in a professional team, invest the resources around that to make it happen. And I think it just has us really well positioned to go out and find some just wonderful, tremendous companies that we can really be a good investor in those companies, because we can operate with a long-term focus. We don't have to be operating on a shorter-term time horizon when we're working with these businesses. So I'm super optimistic about what the future holds. I hope valuation multiples come down a little bit, but I've been saying it for a while. But I should mention, my team is phenomenal, and I just have great people, and it's been really fun to see their growth in this platform. And I just see so much growth ahead for everyone on our team. So it's just fun. And we've built, I think, a great culture out of the gates. I mean, we operate and work like a family because our investment team together, and I think that the Carlson family is obviously a huge part of this as well. We've built a family culture here, and it's been a lot of fun to be a part of, especially in an industry where I think that probably the stereotypes around private equity or private capital is sharp elbows, tough environment. We've been able to make all the right, good decisions, but done that in a way that I think everybody feels really good about.
That's really nice to hear. So on that note, what do you look for? What leadership qualities do you look for when you're bringing somebody onto the team?
Oh, that's a great question. Leadership qualities. I would say somebody that has shown a proven ability to battle through adversity in their life. I like to see just a struggle or a challenge where someone's had to pick themselves up and get back on their horse and make something happen, because that just tells me that resilience gene is there, that grit gene is there. That's really important. A big thing for me is just no egos. People that I'm typically attracted to hiring are, I think, great humility, great integrity. I think all those things carry the day, because at the end of the day, like the private capital business, if it's private equity, if it's family capital, whatever it may be, it's a human capital business. I mean, we're people that are making investment decisions based on analysis, data, thinking, but most importantly, the relationships that you build with people in the deal community and then ultimately your management teams. And it's got to be people that you feel really comfortable and confident are going to build those relationships and just do the right thing that you can trust.
And then throughout your career, what is maybe one behavior or trait that you've seen that derails people's careers?
It's a good question. I would say just getting detached, especially in the space that we play in, where we're investing oftentimes in middle market companies, 50 million to, let's say, $200 million in revenue. Losing that touch and that connectivity to why the business has really been successful before you got involved, and being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, like the ability to do that. Oftentimes, I think it can just derail people's relationships with management or effectiveness, because that effectiveness, oftentimes, working with companies is built first and foremost and always on trust. And you got to have that trust. You got to have that relatability. You got to have that integrity. So I think it's those things of starting to get too much in the ivory tower, or maybe the finance world, versus, thinking about a company that maybe has 500 employees that are working 3 shifts, just kind of like my mom did when she was working back in the day, and understanding that those people that are the critical employees are super important, and they're as important as anybody else. And you got to be able to think through just those dynamics and always appreciate that connectivity to the business in that manner.
Do you have any techniques that you could share with us, or certain steps you go through as you're thinking about building a trust with a new person, with a stranger?
I think it's always connecting first on a personal level. It's finding that level of commonality, and then just making sure that personal connection is established first. So I'm in a meeting with the management team, and we're doing this quite often. I'm always trying to find a link of commonality out of the gates, and that there's a human element to what we're doing, that we're not, especially if we're in the due diligence process or getting to know somebody's company, we're just not robots that are there to regurgitate through Excel spreadsheets, but there's real people here that want to understand their business, that appreciate their perspectives, and understand that their perspectives most of the time are going to be much better than ours, especially around the industries and the companies that that they've been involved in for years. So I think that's probably a lot of it, is that connectivity. And then I just think that ability. I mean, if you ask my team, what my management philosophy would be, for example, they probably say, they hear me say, put yourself in somebody else's shoes the most. And I think that's the thing that I try to do as much as I can, and try to work with our team on as well. As seeing those different perspectives are important, and not just hearing those perspectives, but utilizing those perspectives to just come to a really good decision.
Sounds like Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Last question before we open it up to others, but what other leaders you admire?
What other leaders I admire? I would say the leader that's had the most impact on my career in a positive way is John Lindahl. And John ran Norwest Equity Partners here in town, really started their buyout business back in the 80s. John's been the most influential to me.
What about him?
Well, what I saw from him, he was the leader of NEP, and really successful investor over his career. But it was always the humility and the ability to connect. And he never treated any person different, better, or worse because of what their title was at a company or anything they may be doing. It's just that humility and connectivity and perspective, along with just making really good, thoughtful decisions, that I always really appreciate about his style. And I've tried to emulate the best that I can, but it's tough shoes to fill.
That's great. No, thank you so much. So let's open it up to the audience here. I don't see any questions in the chat. So if you have a moment or have a question, please type it in right now. Or I don't know if there's like raise a hand button so we can unmute you. Otherwise, I can keep going. There we go. So what is your advice to this is from Susan Hamill. Thank you, Susan. What is your advice to young people looking to enter the field?
I would say for young people entering the field, it's for better or for worse. I think the private equity, private capital industry has become, in a lot of ways, a progression type industry where you go to great university, get good grades, hopefully land a job in investment banking or management consulting, that allows you to get some experience to land a job as an associate at a private equity fund. That's the typical path. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm always on the lookout for people that maybe have taken that route, but usually have more of a personal story to what makes them tick. So I think that's a lot of it, is just being able to not only have the pedigree, but also have that connectivity with people, or something more that allows you to differentiate yourself, because it's a hard industry to get into. It's a lot harder than when I started. I don't know if the private equity industry would even take me these days, just given how tough it is to get in.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We got another one here from Scott. I think this is a great one. How would you say your investment perspective has changed from how you thought about things when you started?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I would have said I definitely would have focused much more on the specific business and the numbers around the business and just the analytics than I did the people. And the more that I've been in the industry, the more that I've appreciated, if you're looking at where people spend time in due diligence and where they really should, I would say the people part of it, as I've grown to learn over the years, just it matters so much. And having great leadership at the top, having a really good, strong company culture, I think I've definitely grown to appreciate that much more than I used to, when I probably spent way too much time early in my career with my head down in a spreadsheet.
How do you test for that? How do you do due diligence? Because everybody can put on a show for 2 hours.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest flaws in how businesses are sold. Um, Especially when you look at these competitive auction processes where there may be a couple hundred people looking at a particular company. It's tough to allocate that much time. So what we really try to do is do a lot of work behind the scenes on understanding either ex-employees or people that we know that are customers, suppliers in the industry, to get a sense on, what's the reputation of the business and how does it tick. And then we'll spend a lot of time as we're just getting up to speed on the company, just doing stuff like get together for 2 hours for a social event. Because once you get outside of that conference room and somebody's not looking through a PowerPoint deck, that's when you really get a little bit more of the feel, especially the little detailed things that you pick up in the course of those conversations that ultimately you really get a sense of, how that business is run and how does that person tick. That's the important stuff. But you gotta elbow yourself into being able to spend enough time with management to really make that assessment, which is hard.
Do you ever try to do some proactive research on the companies, hoping that they get on the market one day and you already know them?
Yeah, we do. I mean, especially in Minnesota and Wisconsin, we've got a good short list of companies that we know of, that we admire, that we're trying to get to know a little bit. But it's always a return on time, right? Because you don't know. So we try to position ourselves well where we get to know some of these companies ahead of the game. And obviously the active investments take priority.
Makes sense. We got another one here from Reed. How are you navigating the current deal environment with real winners and losers due to COVID impacts and the current high valuations?
Yeah, I would say on the current environment, the winners and losers, it's been hard. There's been a couple of situations we've looked at here recently that we really like the company, but they clearly had a COVID uplift that it was hard to give value for, at least from our perspective, because we didn't think it was sustainable. But there's others in the market that would. So it just makes it harder. And it just puts more focus on really how businesses performed in 2019. It's interesting because we're looking at a lot of the analyses on new companies we're looking at. 2020 is just such a tough year that you really got to look at where was the trajectory of the business in 2019, because that's really the business that you're going to own, especially if there is some sense of normalization. But it's hard because if things don't go well, companies are always easy to want to add back things to their operating earnings. But when things do go well, they never want to subtract it. So it's a little cat and mouse game.
Yeah, I remember many adjustment lines in the models. Another one from Wade here. In what percentage of situations do you need to find a new CEO and management team for your investments? And then maybe if I can add to that, what are those types of situations where you would consider a thing like that?
Yeah, I mean, in the Carlson Private Capital platform, 0.0, because we're really backing the founders and the basically families that are, working with us on the front end. So we haven't had to do that. In my past life, it was more common, but I think that's a little bit more of the model where people gotta, basically generate a return in 3 to 5 years. So I think there's more of an aptness to have it be transactional versus relational. And, our model, especially as we're deciding what businesses we want to invest in, it's usually augmenting the management team versus replacing the management team. So we're bringing in new talent and resources typically.
And do you ever fear that when the founder or the management team cashes in on this investment, that they're going to lose the motivation to drive further growth?
Yeah, it's always a concern. That's where you want to spend time on the front end, just understanding, how much fire they still have in the belly for the company. And you usually are looking for them to reinvest a fair bit of proceeds, depending on where they're at in their time horizon. But there's also situations too where you may have a founder that says, look, I've got, pick the number, 5 more years that I know I want to transition out. So let's really thoughtfully tailor how that transition plan is going to ultimately go. And that's the beauty in our model too, is that we have a lot more flexibility to really be really thoughtful about how somebody does say, look, I know I want a few more years, but then I want to ride off in the sunset. You can just manage that legacy and how it's all set up much more delicately than you can, I think, in a traditional private equity world where it's, there isn't that same level of patience.
Makes sense. We got one from Kip Christensen here. Another one around young people entering finance. So how should a young people like Kip seek and evaluate mentorship within finance, whether looking to enter finance or grow within the field?
That's a really good question. I would say seeking out mentors is sometimes a challenge unless you're working with somebody on something, or you can develop that relationship. But I find most people in our industry are usually willing to sit down and, have a cup of coffee and share insights or thoughts. I mean, I certainly do that quite often. I would just think about, people that and respect, or they've got some business models that and respect. And I think a lot of it's just reaching out. And so obviously it always helps if you've got a pre-existing relationship or warm introduction there. But I think that type of mentorship can be valuable, especially for somebody early on in their career, because as I mentioned earlier, when you're on your career path, if you really decide you want to get into private equity, it's tougher to take a U-turn later and get in. So I think getting good advice on the front end, a good progression of how you should think about it and where you should go and when. I think that always just helps the process tremendously.
And thank you for that. And Susan just followed up on that same question. Would your answer change if we're talking about women and people of color entering the field because they're so misrepresented in this world, at least at the current state? Yeah,
I don't know if the answer would change around that. We've been fortunate. I think our group, we've got to have.
It's a great example.
Yeah, if not the highest percentage of female investors, and once you get above maybe 2 or 3, for a firm our size, it's going to be 7 approaching 9 this summer. We probably have the highest percentage of female investors in our industry, and we're really proud of that. And it's great. It's a great perspective. And and I think Emma Gergen in particular, who's a principal here, she's really taken it upon herself to be a great mentor for female investors around town. So I do think it's seeking out those people that, unfortunately, there aren't as many women or people of color in those positions, especially in the Twin Cities. But I think finding the ones that are there, and I think you'll find a really willing audience of people that want to help, because I know in the case of the women we have in our staff, we have a lot of conversations about this. We want to encourage more and more to the best of our abilities.
That is great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. One more question from Wade, and then I have one closing one for you. But with your close relationship to the family, do you have the freedom not to invest during a period where you consider valuations to be excessively high?
We go through that exercise all the time when we're talking to our investment committee. I think that's the beauty in how the family has set this up, is that we'll have investment opportunities that are coming our way, and then we'll take it to the investment committee, which 2 family members are on that committee to approve investments that we're going to make. And I think there's just great alignment. There's been great alignment from the first time we started that I think everyone has got a good orientation toward investing and being an investor. And at the end of the day, we want to make good investments. So if people look at it and say, hey, the environment is crazy right now, which it has been for years, you just got to be extra thoughtful and careful as far as what you're paying for these companies and how much time you really want to spend or how much capital you want to deploy in certain environments when it's maybe a little bit frothier, because and when you're living through it, you never think it's going to normalize again. But my experience, seeing a couple cycles, it usually does. And so you just want to be prepared because there'll be really good times to invest too.
Yeah. Well, Andy, this was awesome. In the last couple of minutes here, I want to, give the floor to you and see if you have any ask or closing words for this group here. What do you wish for? How can we help you grow Carlson Private Capital?
No, I appreciate that. This has been great. I just really thankful to be able to talk with everybody today. And, I think obviously the family's had a long and close relationship with the Harvard community. And I think just continuing to support us in any way you can through good thoughts and well wishes. And if you ever are around a business that maybe is looking for some capital from somebody that's got a little bit different view of the world, like we think we do, we're always open to a conversation.
Andy, with that, thank you so much. This was wonderful. And we'll keep in touch, and you let us know if you want to share any other message with the group, and we can send that through our newsletter. And then thank you all for joining tonight. It was another successful and great CEO series, and hope to see you at the next one. We're gonna have Justin Miro, who's a CEO of Kensington Capital Acquisition Company, which is doing SPACs. You may have read about those. They had a very successful, it's a blank check company that then buys a private company and takes it public. They had a really successful first one, and now they're investing in the second one. So we're still waiting to figure out the exact date for that event. So please stay tuned, but hope to see you all there. Thank you and have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody. Have a nice night.
Bye.